Welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. Here we'll talk to the leaders in technology, culture, business, and the arts. We'll cover politics, advocacy, motherhood, writing, mental health, and mostly we'll focus on hope. Join Kim B. Davis, author, playwright, radio personality, event consultant, professional speaker on the Kim B. Davis Show. Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we are continuing our journey of talking about hope and help and healing ourselves. And this evening, and I have to read this, her name is Beth Gardner. Now, she has a lot of good stuff behind her name. So she is a global certified life coach. She is also the owner of Self Reliant. She is a cancer survivor, guys. She has written, so I'm going to call her an author, although it's unpublished. She has written her own book about her journey. She is a graduate of Drexel University in 3 years, guys, with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, with nutrition, food, and science. She was part of the U.S. National Regatta team for rowing, for people that don't know what that is. And you play so well, and we're going to talk about this in the show. You play so well that your professors or your instructors wanted you to try out, and that put you on the U.S. national team where you were able to compete nationally. And last but not least, she's an avid runner and a Christian. Good evening, Beth. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on. Just a quick, with the rowing, I actually never made the national team, but I trained at the national team training sites. So
right. Okay.
I fell short of it because I had breast cancer unknowingly at the time. So I was never actually on the team, but I was invited. So I trained with world-class athletes. So
absolutely. That's an accomplishment in itself. So tonight we're talking about addiction, cancer, and codependency. And we've talked, and you are very passionate about what you do. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do and what put you on this journey.
Sure. So I'm currently life coaching, and I am certified to individuals who have not had an addiction experience in their life. They are not substance abuse users, nor have they had any sort of type of addiction, but they have been surrounded by addiction throughout their life, whether it be in the family, the work environment, an extracurricular activity like a sport, any type of club, and in their family, and again, in their personal life. I am someone who has not had an addiction, but throughout my life, regardless of, if it was a sport I was involved in school, professors, for example, in the corporate environment, there are always people that are struggling with addiction. And before I continue on with that, let me preface that I don't believe anyone comes into this world wanting to have the DNA for an addiction or mental illness of any type. And when I say mental illness, I don't even like the term. A mental challenge such as anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, a personality disorder of some sort, or bipolar. I don't believe people come into this world wanting to have that type of struggle throughout their life. So I'm very compassionate and open-minded and non-judgmental people that do. However, from my own experience of being surrounded by them throughout my life, I eventually found myself being traumatized, sometimes not even knowing it, because of the emotional abuse that was surrounded with it and challenges. And so what I'm currently doing as a life coach is acting as a non-judgmental, confidential sounding board to people, again, that are not substance abuse users or addicts, but have been surrounded by it. And how I came to grips with what I was dealing with as, again, a non-addict, but had been severely traumatized by it, was back in November of 2000. I had just retired from the elite sport of rowing, And a year prior to that, I had moved to New York City, was doing a dream job, working for the New York Times on the entertainment page, posting the news. And I was also training at the time for the Philadelphia Marathon, which I had planned to be my first and only marathon. Many rowers, once they retire or even before, get involved in cycling, whether it's at the professional level or amateur. They do marathons. So I'm an endurance athlete. I wanted to try it once and be done with it. So I was literally on target to do the Philadelphia Marathon November of 2000. And long story short, I ended up being diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, which cancer in my family does not run. So it was a jolt, not just to me, but to my entire family, that someone like myself, who had been an athlete my entire life, who had been conscious about what I ate, simply because if I didn't eat well, my body wouldn't perform. My body's a machine, it's a tool. So any experienced athlete, regardless of what the sport is, knows that you need to be careful, particularly the day before an event, what you're eating and you're putting into your body. Otherwise, your body's not going to perform to their max capacity. So I went on a journey during my 5-year recession period to actually fully recover from cancer. So that would have been 2000 to 2005, trying to find out how on earth someone like myself would have had cancer. I expected to get injuries. Rowers are known for getting intercostal, broken ribs. I could have had a knee injury from all my running, but I had never been injured, and I rarely was sick. So then during that time, I was trying to research and understand more about cancer. I came across a book by the late Louise Hay, who's unfortunately no longer with us, but she's still with us in spirit. And she wrote a book that's called You Can Heal Your Life. And in that book, she explained the reasoning, the metaphysical reasoning for each type of illness, whether it be diabetes, whether it be cancer of any sort, or an addiction. And so with breast cancer, she said that it represented, breasts of course represent mothering and nurturing. So if you receive breast cancer, it was because of the lack of mothering and nurturing you were not giving to yourself, or was not given to you, or sometimes both. And that sort of put a red flag in my head. And then I read about her definition and reasoning for cancer. And she said it was from deep hurt, long lasting resentment, deep grief, and carrying hatreds for far too long. That was another light bulb moment for me. Why? Because it was then I connected the dots between my breast cancer, again, not being nurturing to myself, and having lived an extremely challenging life, driving myself to achieve in unsurmountable levels, graduating from Drexel in 3 years. By the way, Drexel's a term semester system, so you're only going for 10 weeks and then you do your final. So it's very high pace. But I also realized that having been surrounded by addiction in the family life, having a professor or some type of teacher that they may have had it, or being surrounded by it in a sport, was feeding into that as well. So I do believe it, even to this day, that having been surrounded by addiction for such a length of time, as well as having been overachiever, the classic type A personality, having grown up in an extremely conservative Christian home where you were taught to use everything that God gave you. It talks about it extensively in the book of Matthew. I ended up making myself unknowingly sick. So that's how I've gotten involved in helping people like myself who've been surrounded by addiction, may not realize that they are sick from it, and may still be carrying that baggage with them. That again is deep, dark roots
Mhm.
of toxicity that needs to be actually extracted, and so they can head on a path to healing. That makes any sense.
It makes uh, so much sense. And it always brings me back to the statement where you talked about holding on to hate for far too long and how it has to be removed from the body. And my thought is a lot of times people carry around hate for another individual or a situation that revolves around someone. And we often say, you hating someone is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. And a lot of people carry around a lot of different wounds, hate, anger, sadness, grief, whatever it is. And oftentimes, we see when people go through certain diseases, not all the time, but sometimes it's because someone has gone through something really hard. They will have lost a child, lost a spouse, and then later will have a cancer diagnosis, and everybody will say, oh, what's next? And, we'll attribute it and say, these are the things that happen in life. This is part of the trials of life. But there may be something to that when grief is unresolved, that it does do damage inside your body. And most people talk about, if you suffer from anxiety or if you suffer from depression, you feel it physically. You can't necessarily explain it, but with depression, and it's something that I struggle with, where there are days, you know you just feel tired, and it's not because you haven't eaten, it's not because you haven't slept, it's your spirit, your soul feels weighted down by the pressures of whatever it is that's worrying you, causing you anxiety, or that you just ruminate on. I think it's important. But I want to go back to something that you said. You talked about growing up in a very conservative household. And I know that you've also talked about having parents that struggle with depression and not necessarily talking about it, and it being sort of this situation where we just suck it up, deal with it. As you said, the Bible does talk about use all the gifts that you have. Do you think that as women we do that to our own um fault? That because many of us have been raised that way, in the African American community, Black women are often taught, just keep going, just keep your head up and keep going, just push it down. And I think universally that's a very feminine type of sentiment, that we just push our emotions down and we keep going until we get to a point where we can't push it down anymore, and either we have a mental breakdown or collapse or disease comes.
Yes, I agree with that 110%. I believe it's completely non-discriminatory. So it can happen in any culture with women. I don't believe it just happens here in the United States. Um, so yes, I do believe I had grown up with parents that were raised in the 50s. My friends that I grew up with had parents that were raised in the 60s. So there was definitely a difference in a level of conservative household in my household compared to others. So,
Mhm.
anyone that was raised in the 50s or before that, they were taught to repress it, to push it down.
Mhm.
Society, you weren't supposed to talk about that stuff. And interestingly enough, you weren't even allowed to talk about it in the church, which, I've always thought that the church should be a place where there's healing involved. You're coming in there to feed your soul. At least that's what I was doing, getting
Mhm.
that lesson plan for the week, feed my soul. I leave, and normally I have a little bit more bounce in my step. Um, but yeah, it hands down for me. I mean, it was definite. Even how I handled the cancer, I handled it all on my own. I was my own financial advisor. I handled all the health insurance. I went to all of my treatments on my own. So I had 6 months total of chemotherapy. It was expected of me
Wow.
to be able to handle that on my own, just like it was expected of me to go to college and do well, just like it was expected of me, to take everything that God's given me and run with it to the best of my ability. And I think that there's a danger in that, in the fact that you can make yourself sick, And I trained at the time with a Russian coach. He was originally from the Ukraine, Olympic level coach, and he came to the United States, and he invited me to train with all the world class athletes, the Olympians, which was an absolute privilege. But there's a different mindset where he had come from,
Mm-hmm.
where you train yourself until you're broken. We'll wrap a little duct tape around you, and then we'll put you back out there.
Wow.
So I do believe that you can, not just with your mind, you can actually create an illness by repressing. Absolutely. And with women, I agree. So
Mm-hmm.
particularly though that generation, in the 1950s or sooner or before that, that definitely the women were trained to repress.
Mm-hmm.
Soldier on.
Yes, and I would agree that that same sentiment is still being pushed in certain families. I grew up in a home where there were certain things that just weren't discussed, and mental health was one of those things.
Correct.
And I watched as my girlfriends, we all have conversations now. We watched our mothers, we watched our aunts, our grandmothers all work tirelessly for each other and around the community, and then many of them came up with different conditions or different diseases. And so now here we are approaching some of those ages thinking, I don't want to be sick in my 50s, or I don't want to be sick in my 60s. I know people who are in their 90s who are still in their right mind, and I always tell people, I said I want to get to 90 and still be in my right mind and be driving. I know that's a stretch, but I know a few people that still do that. But I want to still be able to be independent. I don't want to have a heart attack at the age of 50 and then, have to rely on family members or my children or whoever it is to help take care of me. But I want to go back to something else that you said. You talked about, and I think that this is an important point, because in America, we have a drug problem. We are hooked on everything, whether it's oxycodone or Vicodin or any of those types of drugs, or where we're talking about illicit street drugs. I've even told people, and I love coffee, but caffeine is a big drug, and sugar is probably the number one drug in the world. Everybody is addicted to something. But you talked about being surrounded by people who were taking different things. What was it in you that did not allow you to participate in that?
First of all, I knew that it was in the DNA. So I come from two genetic gene pools that are known, that are stereotyped, part Irish, and then I'm part Scandinavian. So Scandinavian, there's always that symbolism of vodka and big horns, and and then there's Irish. And as much as I believe that everyone should have a dash of Irish in them, because it's a beautiful culture, they're both known for having alcoholism. It's Scandinavian simply because the winters are so long and they're dark.
Mm-hmm.
So drinking and eating is probably a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ireland is the same way. So I knew in my DNA it was there. I had family members that struggled with it for generations. So couple that ended up not living long because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that, I was very careful. I mean, was so straight laced in high school and into college. I really didn't drink much for that fear of it triggering something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was already high energy by nature by being an endurance athlete. Everyone brain is hardwired in a different way. Some people are brained as musicians, so writing music just flows out of them. An artist, a painter, can just start with strokes and actually create an actual painting. Where I'm hardwired as an athlete, where I'm like I see a green light and all I think is go. It's hard for me to, used to be hard for me to sit still because I'm just high energy. I hear music and I'm just moving. So that's just how my brain is wired. But I was just very careful about touching any of it, for having seen the number of lives that were damaged because of it too. Going back to what I was saying earlier, I was raised in a conservative Christian home, but then I was also had the opportunity and the privilege of growing up in a predominantly Jewish community. So I had the benefits of both worlds. I had the Old and New Testament, but both were high achieving environments. And so I was, expected to achieve and use everything that God gave me to the point that it's, there's almost like self-guilt, like you're expected to. There's no, otherwise you'll be shamed if you're not. Yeah. So knowing that it ran in the family, I clearly stayed away from it for a long time, not knowing how it would actually affect me. Had I, had a drink or two, I was just very careful because I didn't want it to mess up my life. And whatever God had prepared for me, which, ended up being college and then rowing, which in Pittsburgh, we didn't have it when I was growing up. So I wasn't even aware of that sport until I was working one summer at the New Jersey shore. That's where I discovered it. That's where I was enticed by it, by training it. But I also knew it was God's sign for me to take the running skill and the athleticism that I had and go forward and give it a go. But I've seen too much of it growing up. Seeing too many extraordinarily talented people, to genius level, just struggle with it. And to me, it's just so sad. It goes back to what I said earlier. No, I don't fault anyone that struggles with addiction, regardless of what it is, whether it's a sex addiction, shopping addiction, food addiction. I just feel bad for them because they've been born into this world, very much so at times with the DNA for it. Like you're born with high blood pressure or cholesterol. I see people struggle with that, and it's a shame, because then I also see their extraordinary talents and how it can get in the way of just living a happy, healthy life. So that's why I'm so focused on being healthy all my life. And then, my brain's hardwired for that, to be an athlete. It's not to be a designer of any sorts, or, plenty of things I can't do. So
that's okay, because what you're doing is a wonderful thing. So I think it's very appropriate that you talk about the calling on your life, because now you're an advocate. Talk about why advocacy is so important. And when you were going through your cancer journey, because you said you did all of this on your own, so you had to advocate for yourself. Who, a lot of times, and I've worked for a national cancer organization before. And so I've talked with people, and, we've all had to go to the doctor, and we've all had a doctor who has tried to talk down to us as if we didn't understand what was happening to us. And then having to have a conversation to say, you need to explain this to me because you're my doctor. You don't get to talk down to me or tell me what I need to do. No, these are the questions that I have. I need you to answer them for me, and we're going to do what's best for me. We are supposed to have a relationship where you're my doctor, you listen to my concerns, I give them back to you, and you give me the best expert advice that you can under your opinion. Can you talk about advocacy? Because advocacy for me is very, very important.
Well, to have gone through such a challenge, and I do see it as a challenge, it's not like I was given a scarlet letter. To given the challenge and then having been blessed to be able to figure it out, let alone be still alive today. You
Mm.
know, I remember the statistics I've had when I had surgery back in February. My tongue was a little, so I have a bit of a list. But
It's okay.
when I had the statistics read to me back in November 2000, you know, I wasn't supposed to make it for 5 years because, again, it's stage 3. It's not stage 1 where they can just do radiation. It
Mm-hmm.
was aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the fact that God had blessed me with an analytical brain to be able to manage the finances, understand the game of the insurance,
Mm-hmm.
right, and how that worked and how I could make it benefit for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, you know, being analytical enough to keep my appointments, even though I had chemo ahead. I worked full time, but
Wow.
I needed that because I needed that distraction. That just goes to show how analytical, and you know, I call myself a closet nerd. How, you know, I like to be busy. I like to keep my mind active. So having to organize that and then make sure that I was going to persevere through it like an athlete. Once I figured all that out, I was like, well, aren't there other people that struggle with this as well? Because what I had found when I was going through all the different challenges, and they were anxiety provoking, I wasn't receiving the help I needed. It goes back to my explanation as to why I'm helping non-addicts,
Mm-hmm.
because when I looked for that help, I kept finding psychiatrists, social workers, therapists, a wide range of people. They were all licensed to work with people with addiction,
Mm-hmm.
not on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that just didn't seem right, doesn't seem fair.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you think about the multi-million-dollar addiction facilities where you can go to an exotic island and get sober,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. If I had that problem, I'd be heading there too. And I might just stay or find somewhere to live around there. You know, if I like the I won't be back. But then it just seems to me it's only fair, and maybe it's just because I'm a Libra, but you know, you need to have something for people on the other side that have cared tremendously for those that struggle with addiction,
Mm-hmm.
have tried to help them repeatedly, and need recovery themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and not just a 12-step method.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when I realized with the cancer that I wasn't really given a roadmap or a path to follow, you know, I'm thinking to myself, you people need to have some sort of outline of what to expect and what I should do. And because I'm sure there are other people like myself out there,
Mm-hmm.
who are actually suffering in silence and trying to figure this out on their own. And it's very hard when you have toxins feeding through your body, you know, and you're having sort of senior moments, but you're only 30.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
challenging. So I see it as a way of giving back. It's like I rode for 6 years, and then I actually coached 3 years after that while I was going through the chemo, because I thought, well, I want to give back to rowing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take that knowledge. I want to challenge myself to be able to verbalize it, because it's one thing to be able to physically do an activity, but to be able to turn it around and teach it to
Mm-hmm.
a wide range of different people who all have different type of learning styles, different backgrounds. It's a challenge, but I wanted the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So then too, with the cancer and then the non-addiction, I'm giving back. It only makes sense to me to give back. No one should be suffering in silence at this day and age.
Right.
You know, I can remember sitting in church in Philadelphia at 10th Presbyterian on 17th and Walnut and just crying silently because I was in so much pain
Mm-hmm.
emotionally
Mm-hmm.
and exhausted spiritually
Mm-hmm.
from just trying to plug through the journey. Because the name of the game, stay alive.
Yes.
It's just like this COVID. What's the name of the game?
Stay
Stay
alive.
alive.
That's right.
Exactly. You know, it's like back at the end of March of last year when I figured out really what was going on. I'm like, oh, the rules of game and life has just changed.
Mm-hmm.
What's my rule?
Mm-hmm.
Make sure everyone's safe and stay alive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Everything else doesn't matter now. So, and when you have that perspective in life and you're literally hanging on by your fingertips, it's a literally a do or die situation. So it was a do or die for me. And I'm thinking, well, maybe if I give people a path and can help them through healing, through the non-addiction, I can help prevent them from getting some type of sickness along the way. And it could be anything. It's not just cancer.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. So I want to go back to something you said, because you said something to me that was very important.
You're
You
a good
talked,
listener, by the way.
oh, well, thank you. So you talked about figuring out the insurance game. And we know that insurance is a huge problem in this country. We went through wherever you stand on affordable care. Before affordable care came, there was an issue where the insurance companies could literally cap how much coverage you could have. So if you got a cancer diagnosis and your cancer didn't go the routine way, whether it's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, there are some people who've had like a stage 3 or stage 4 like you have, and been able to survive, and it not saying that yours wasn't that bad, but it turned out that it wasn't as bad as what they thought it was, and they were able to take it back down. Or you have someone who would be diagnosed at stage 1, and then it turns into something that takes their life. And then we're talking about, and this is just the dollars. We're not talking about how do you get to visits. We're not talking about your mental care and how you deal with going through treatments, how you sit for hours on end alone, how your body is we're not talking about anything of that sort. Just talking about the sheer amount of money that it costs for these treatments. And for an insurance company to say, well, we're only going to pay $750,000. And if you go over that, guess what? We're not going to cover you. You have to figure it out. And so before the Affordable Care Act was passed, there were people who were literally trying to figure out, well, how do I get health care? How do I get a doctor to continue to cover radiation or chemotherapy? Or how do I have surgery when I can't afford it? And we're still having that, not the same conversation, but similarly, how do we get some of these things passed? And for you to say you figure that out, it boggles my mind, because there are people that are diagnosed with cancer every day that struggle with just that. We have people who struggle. In Michigan, we have several different places that work with low income people in terms of cancer treatment and care. And a lot of them will organize transportation. A lot of them will organize peer support and different things, just so that you have someone who advocates. But the majority of the time, when you get that cancer diagnosis, it's the same reaction. People are like, oh, it's the C word. I didn't want to hear that. It takes a minute to get that diagnosis and understand it. And then once you understand it, then you're like, okay, now what am I supposed to do now? I've got to go get radiation. I may have to go get a biopsy so they can make sure that it's just localized in one area. Or maybe I need to go get some different x-rays to see if it's spread. Maybe I need to go have chemotherapy, and I got to figure out a schedule for that. That's just that part. We haven't even touched on diet. We haven't touched on supplements that you may have to take to boost your immune system while you're going through this process. Can you talk about some of the things that you do when you advocate for people? Because those are the things that a lot of people struggle with and don't have when they get that diagnosis.
Sure. Well, one of the things that if we were to discuss the insurance, at the time of my diagnosis, I had a standard form of Blue Cross Blue Shield. I
Mhm,
did not have the Premier, the top of the line.
mhm,
Um, but what I had to do in order to make sure that the majority of everything was covered. There were some things during surgery that they had to do that weren't covered.
mhm,
But the name of the game was to keep resubmitting my claim.
mhm.
As tedious as it may seem, it's really important to keep resubmitting because that persistence is what paid off.
Okay.
So fortunately, my surgeon had a woman in the office who handled all the cases, the insurance cases, and she was very helpful to explain to me, you got to just keep resubmitting. So it became, another to-do list for me
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
make sure and be persistent. Say,
Mhm.
you know what, I'm not taking no as an example. So that was one of the things I did. I did end up having um, going into $30,000 of debt, which for me was a lot because when I graduated Drexel, I think I only had 10,
Mm.
and and that was paid off in a year.
Okay.
So that kind of, and I was all then self-funding my own rowing boat, my own rowing career.
Mhm.
There was all the self-funding. So that was a lot to me. So the 30,000 was a lot. So then I had to work with the insurance company on setting up that payment plan,
Mhm.
proving to them how much income I had at the time and that I would not be able to afford to make large payments.
Mhm.
So it's important, and not just with that. I mean, I didn't have much debt or any credit cards really much at that time. So I was fortunate in my own sort of financial, um, personal finances, that I didn't have to set up payment plans with any other credit card company or with any of the utilities. But I will say with people that if you are battling any type of disease, not just cancer, and you're having struggles with the payments, they are open and actually more appreciative of people calling in and saying, and I'm not going to be able to make the payment. That you can prove what you are bringing in terms of financing, and request a payment plan so that you don't affect your credit score.
Mhm.
And it is very challenging here in the US. The name of the game is communicating and being persistent compared to Canada, where so much of everything is taken care of,
Mhm. Mhm.
including including the elderly.
Mhm.
So yeah, persistence and open communication. Be honest. There's no shame in saying I can't afford this. You
Mm.
can't draw blood out of a rock. So, persistence and submitting your claims, and then be honest about getting on a payment plan and stick to that payment plan. Because if they see you stick to it, then it's all the more respectful to them. You don't
Mm.
want to be disrespectful. You don't
Mm.
want to get angry with them. You just going to be straightforward and honest and professional about it.
Mhm. Mhm. And those are good points. And I think you're absolutely right. The American system compared with a lot of other systems around the world, we need to do some tweaking because people are still struggling when people shouldn't, and you cannot draw blood from a rock. So a lot of people get in a situation similarly to yours and have debt or have to file bankruptcy or lose their home or some other terrible outcome that was not the intention initially in the beginning.
Yeah,
But
it's even a chapter in my book. Excuse me, I don't mean to
oh yeah,
interrupt you.
please, no, go ahead.
I said I was choosing between a lifeline and my credit line,
Wow.
because I didn't want to file bankruptcy.
Hmm.
That's also why I worked. It wasn't just because I did need that mental stimulation. I'm not someone to just sit at home and twiddle my thumbs,
Hmm.
but um, I needed to bring in that income so that I could make payments, and prove to them that I'm actively trying. So that the fact that I was able to work all the way through it and hide it for most of the time, um, gave them the confidence that I was also I was being a team player and was going to be able to pay it off.
Hmm.
So it's very scary though when you have to choose between your lifeline and your credit line.
Hmm.
And when you haven't done anything wrong, you've lived a very, honest life, clean life, and all of a sudden this comes at you. I think the key thing too is to not feel shamed by it, which would go back
Hmm.
to the church. How many people that have been raised in a very conservative religious family, regardless of what it is, have dealt with shame,
Hmm.
and that's toxic.
Hmm.
And I had to train my brain to say, you know what, it's okay. Don't shame yourself for it. Don't shame yourself for getting sick.
Hmm.
You didn't know it was going to happen.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of it was environment. So not shaming yourself, being open in communication, and then, persistent on your payments.
And those are great points. I wanted, and you, what you just said is going to put us into our next question. So, in your sophomore year of college, you went through a difficult situation. Can you talk about how that impacted who you have become today?
Okay. Sophomore. Oh, when my parents
Yes.
divorced. Is that
Yes.
the one? It's like,
Hmm.
which one?
I know. You have an
Going through my brain.
you have an amazing story, just how you've overcome so many different things in your life.
So yeah, so it wasn't uncommon, particularly during the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, and I don't know what the marriage rate is now, but for people to divorce, divorce rate was high.
Mhm.
Um, and God bless my parents, they gave it all they got. I had a special needs older brother, which contributed to the stress. So that marriage ended, and I found myself with that $14,000 bill
Mhm.
and having to figure out a way to pay for it. Really realizing my mother would contribute what she could on a nurse's salary, but by that point, um, because of where I'd grown up, um, because I had originally been told by my father, "Don't worry, we'll cover college," and because I kept saying in like my freshman and sophomore year of high school, "Do you want me to stick with a sport and I'll just try to get scholarship
Mhm.
for part of a ride, not full ride?" He says,
Mhm.
"No, no, 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 you don't need to do that." And I was like, "All right, I could stick with basketball." So anyway, I had to figure out the funding for that because of the books and food,
Mhm.
little things like that, of that nature, and personal items. And so I ended up, um, that's when I started waitressing. That's when I got my feet wet in the waitressing and bartending industry. And I started really at Chili's for just a couple months to get myself acclimated. And then I ended up getting hired by a high-end restaurant in Philly that unfortunately is no longer there, but it's called the Striped Bass. And anyone listening and from the area would probably remember it. Very high end. A lot of celebrities would come in, so
Mhm.
I would bartend there because it was a great way as a college student to get cash under the table.
Mhm.
And it was a wonderful place to work. The manager was outstanding, including the owner. So that helped self-fund. And then Drexel University, which is one of the reasons I chose to go there, has a co-op system where you can work and go to school at the same time.
Okay.
So I got hired at Moss Rehabilitation Center in North Philadelphia, which is behind Albert Einstein Hospital.
Mhm.
And I worked there. So that was also funding money for me to apply to school, but at the same time get some great experience,
Mhm.
which again is the reason why I went to Drexel, because when I graduated, I didn't want to just have a diploma. I wanted to have some sort of experience so I could get employment.
Mhm. Mhm.
So those two things are what I did. I probably slept on average 4 hours a night, and then just learned how to be a speed reader, brushed up on my test taking skills, and managed to get out of there um, with a good GPA. So yeah, that's kind of what happened at that point. Because I wanted an education. I came from a long line of relatives that had fortunately been educated. I wasn't going to deny myself of that. Plus, I didn't know really what I would do with my life without it, at least a college degree.
Mhm. Mhm.
It had been programmed in my head. So,
And that's, education is everything. Education is what can lift you to the next level. And once you realize that, there's no stopping you. I would add to your list of names resilient, because you have overcome so many different things. I mean, you had a cancer diagnosis before you were preparing, or while you were preparing for the Philadelphia Marathon. What was going through your mind at that time? And I know we've talked a little bit about it, but is there anything that was going through your mind at that time where you thought, huh, really? Is this really what I'm supposed to have happening right now, God?
right. Yeah, well, my diagnosis, by the way, I was driving on North 611th Street in Philadelphia. And those, again, who are living in Philadelphia and actually see this will be familiar with the area, but I was diagnosed and I wasn't actually far from Albert Einstein Hospital when I got the call, and I picked up my cell phone and I had my Starbucks coffee mug and I'm driving a stick shift, and somehow I was able to talk to her, but I wasn't able to tell her I was in the car. And she said, "We got your needle biopsy back and it's cancer." And I'm in the left lane. All of a sudden I need to put the coffee down and shift over and get to a local Sunoco, which was right down the street. So what went through my mind? Shock. I think that's the first time second time in my life I really went into shock. The shock would have been the during the education my sophomore year. That was shocking. But this was just shocking because I thought, oh no, my life is going to be cut short. I'm very healthy. And, of course, I had parents at the time who were already nearing retirement or older, and I didn't want them to have to bury their child. That was one of the first things that came across my mind, is no parent should bury their child. So I was protective of them. If I often joke with people, if God had brought me on this planet and had me be a dog, I'd most likely be a German Shepherd, because that's the one I seem to resonate with. So I'm very protective. And that was my thought. That was actually what helped me persevere through it, was, I'm not going to die. I don't have time for this. So that's one of the things went through my mind. I also knew that there was a reason behind it. Everything happens for a reason. So, analytically, the left side of my brain, I'm definitely left side dominant, but it was just spinning all the time. Trying to problem solve, and handle everything, driving, so that was also what came through my mind. But I also knew intuitively, I am a very intuitive person and obviously have great faith. I knew that God had sent me to the right surgeon, because I had actually gone to 2 other surgeons in addition to the one that diagnosed me. And she was the first one that knew right away, let's do needle biopsy. And intuitively, I knew she's the right person to be with, hands down. So I knew there was a piece to it where I thought, well, I'm with the 5th best surgeon in the United States. So it can't be wrong. I knew that Penn Hospital in Philadelphia was one of the best in the country, another world-renowned hospital. So I knew, although statistically it looked like everything was stacked up against me, I knew I had the best of care. I had the best oncologists. And it was also because I'm an athlete and had been training for so many years at that level with these world-class, Olympic level rowers. And then again, having 2 different coaches, not just the one that was Russian, but 2 different coaches that were really strong and dynamic individuals that really taught you how to push yourself. I knew I was going to be able to take that drive and apply it at God's will. Right? All of this is God's will. So that's basically the things that were going through my mind at the time, and there was a lot of, I didn't tell a lot of people, to be honest. I told immediate family because they had to know, but I was real quiet in the rowing community because I didn't want it to explode. And I didn't want it to affect other people's lives. Again, I'm very protective, which again, I think goes back to my upbringing, to our discussion on women, to suppressing emotions. I'd already been doing all that all along. So this was just another, analytical challenge for me. Yet a big one, but that I had to go through, if that makes any sense. And I do know that God was with me the whole way. Like, I knew he directed me to the right surgeon, and he was directing me. So I was leaning on faith the whole time while working through the anxiety.
And that's important. And that's what I was waiting for you to say. I knew, because from our conversations, that you were leaning on your faith. I also know that from talking to you, you are a very driven individual. And so to have a conversation with God and say, but I still have some things to do that you gave me to do. I'm not done yet. And he'd probably be like, okay, I'm gonna give you a little while longer. You got to get this done. We're
Well,
joking.
I have been known. I mean, I remember one time when I was back here in Pittsburgh and my mother and my brother were sick with what was that swine flu going around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And our cat was sick and that ended up dying. And I remember at one point standing out in the front lawn and being like, really?
Exactly.
And I have been known to do
Exactly.
that. I mean, I like to think I have a close relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I have been known to be like, oh, really? This is what you're throwing my way now? So there's part of me that knew that, it was something that I was going to have to lean on him to achieve. But, I also, from you figuring out by now, I lean on humor, quick wit, to help me get through it, sarcasm a little bit. So,
And laughter is the best medicine. So
it is.
it is always good to laugh when I feel heavy, weighed down, and I can just laugh. I have some really goofy movies that I will watch that are so stupid and so dumb. And people who know me personally, they know what I'm talking about. But for other people outside, I won't say the name of it because people might look at me and go like, "Really, Kim? You like that movie?" But there are movies that are so stupid that I don't have to think about it. I can just watch it and I can laugh. And it's that whole body just fills you with joy, laugh. And so, going back to what you were talking about earlier when we were talking about disease and different things, when we're holding on to grief, when we're holding on to anger and hate, and how that's putting poison and toxins into our body, laughter is what brings it out. And so for you to talk about, although being driven and being focused and having resiliency, you always leaned on your faith as you march forward and as you continue to march forward. So we applaud you for all that you do. Before we leave, if someone is struggling with cancer, if someone is going through a challenging situation, what advice would you give them? And they're struggling to see God in that situation. What advice would you give them?
Contact me.
That's
Let's, like I said at the start, I am a confidential, non-judgmental sounding board. I'm highly analytical, so I'm good at solving not only my problems, but even better with other people's because they're not my own. To be able to see sort of the roadmap, the blueprint, the special path that's best for you. Because when I work with everyone, I do see people, and I don't mean to sound silly, but I do see people as unique as snowflakes. As you know, with snowflakes, no
Mhm.
two are apparently the same.
You're
And
not.
while I've never held up a magnifying glass to falling snow, I'm taking it faith of God that that is correct. So I handle everyone's situation as unique as they are, because everyone is unique as everyone else. So yeah, they can contact me at on my website, which is selfreliant.info.
Mhm.
Info is short for information, but selfreliant.info. And I offer free consultation to just sort of get a feel for what their challenge is, and before actually deciding the approach to use. So that's the best way for them to contact me.
Awesome. Now, do you have an email address? Can we find you on social media?
You can find me on social media. My email address is my first name, Beth, my last name, Gardner, and you'll have that spelled out. And then 250 at yahoo.com. A lot of people change the spelling of the last name. So be sure to see that, when Kim posts it, they can. And then I'm also on Facebook in Pittsburgh. And from there, that page, you can actually watch my recovery from my recent brain surgery, which was benign, that I had in February. And then unfortunately, we had a passing in the family. So I've sort of documented all that, but more so the brain surgery to inspire other people
Mhm.
about bouncing back.
Mhm. Mhm. God still has work for you to do. You still have assignments. You got to get busy, Beth.
I was pulling out my quotes, as I told you, from my book. And one of the ones I pulled out was from that Mother Teresa, who says, I know God won't give me anything I can't handle. I just wish you wouldn't trust me so much. And that's been an ongoing theme for me, particularly
Yeah.
with, the beginning of this year until now, because I had to put my father into an assisted living in
Mhm,
addition to surgery and then my brother
mhm,
passing.
mhm.
Things come in threes, and they certainly did. So,
They do. They do. But you were able to handle all of it with grace,
thank you.
and we are so happy to see that you came through your surgery strong and healthy, and just continue to wish you nothing but good things. And hopefully you will be able to come back on the Kim B. Davis show and we'll be able to continue this fascinating conversation.
Oh, I would love it. I would be honored. Thank you. Thank you for having me too.
Thank you for being here. Now give us your contact information one more.
Sure. I can be reached at Beth Gardner 250 at yahoo.com. And Gardner is spelled Gard, as in doctor, and as a nurse, ER. So it's Beth Gardner 250 at yahoo.com. And then my website is selfreliant.info. And you can find me on Facebook too.
Excellent, excellent. And we will post the links with this video. Thank you again, Beth, for coming on the Kim B. Davis show and being with us. Thank you guys for tuning in. We hope that you will tune in for our next show. Remember, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Snapchat, and TikTok. Yes, I'm on all social media channels under Kimberly Batchelor Davis. Bachelor is spelled Batchelor. You can see this show on youtube.com/Kimberly Batchelor Davis. You can also find out more about me as an author at kimbdavis.com. You can also listen to this show on Apple, Spotify, Google, and Stitcher. And as always, remember, be magnificent.